Deep in the sequestered places of the highland valleys, spring is slow to come, and this spring has been cooler and wetter than most. Regardless, as the season unfolds, it reveals a cornucopia, if you just take a moment to look around. There is so much bounty I cannot name it all, and I know from experience I can collect more in a month than I can use all year. To my right is a rosette of the tarragon and carrot-flavored leaves of the oxeye daisy. And just beyond that grows the clumpy rosette of mullein, soft as the skin of a fawn. It is a plant of 1,000 uses, though my personal favorite is to enjoy it as a cold tea come the hot depths of summer. Its flavor is unique, light and refreshing, but it likes dry, hard ground, which is rare here in the highlands. So I carefully husband this patch, taking only a few leaves through the course of a year. And as I walk through this wooded cornucopia, all around is the music of birds, thrushes and warblers and jays, and even the odd owl up well past his bedtime. And to my left I espy another cluster of springtime bounty, wintercress. With its zesty flavored bright yellow flowers and tender leaves, it's great in salads and sandwiches of all kinds. And here we have the young fruits of a serviceberry tree, perhaps a month from ripe. In the sun, their delicate white petals have fallen away, revealing the fruits developing in the ovaries of the blossoms. But in a moment, a light late spring rain begins to fall, and in forest shadow I find more blossoms, these with petals pale as ghosts. Deviating from the old dirt road that stretches miles and miles through the forest to an old farm, takes me into the valley's very heart, where a clear brook, fed by 1,000 little springs, nurtures a prematurely green landscape filled with thorn and serviceberry trees. And here and there we find the early eager blossoms of a young apple tree. A landscape cared for and loved. In the brooks and hidden ponds are trout, and a wild, untended land overflows with food. So much so there is even space for these tent caterpillars. But as I headed toward the great hemlocks further down the path, a bright and rich green, too early for this time of the year, caught my eye. Down there, in the shadows beneath the boughs of one of the many apple trees, I espied clusters of green, thickest tussocks, a giveaway that I have found a thicket of the wild or feral variety of a plant popular among flower gardeners. Yet few, whether gardeners or foragers, realize its use. This plant is Stonecrop, also known as sedum. There are many kinds of sedums, and countless cultivars, and many of them have escaped from gardens, hybridized and adapted to their local environments. So be aware that the sedum you may find can vary. But of the one that grows near me, I believe I can say that this plant is a wild or feral variation of what was once known as Sedum Spectabile, though in recent years, probably in light of new genetic testing techniques, the plant has been reclassified into Hylotelephium spectabile. Here in the maritime provinces, and especially in eastern Nova Scotia, this plant is commonly seen growing in flower beds. It is native to Asia, in particular China and Korea. But H. spectabile is a highly adaptive plant, and as often happens with highly adaptive plants, it escaped cultivation and went feral. Now, at least in this region of Nova Scotia, it is not difficult to find H. spectabile growing in waste places, or even in wilder regions like where I live. I can find it growing anywhere that the ground is sandy and well drained, but occasionally prone to becoming quite wet, as in during the thaw and after long rains. While some sedums really require open sunlight, the local variation of it for sure does not. It definitively prefers to grow in the partial shade of open woodland, and this ancient wild apple tree, which regularly yields hundreds of pounds of apples to us every year when I come here to harvest, is positively surrounded by it, where it grows in dense clusters around the entire circumference of the tree, all the way right up to the trunk. I usually visit this tree, several miles from my cottage, sometime in October to gather the apples, and by then the sedums are long gone. So I had no idea that they were there until this walk, but I'm glad I found them. Because this succulent plant is an excellent forageable, and its leaves can be used raw, as part of a salad, or whipped in a blender with other things to make a tasty and nutritious smoothie. The leaves of sedums can also be added to soups, stir-fries, and other dishes for some vegetable herbal flavor. Stonecrop, or sedum, is a succulent. It's easy to identify succulents because the body of a succulent plant feels, how do I put it? Often they feel like a thin leather bag that's been filled with water, though they may be softer or firmer. If you've ever handled a cactus, they are relatively hard, and yet if you've ever cut one open, you will know that they are filled with water. On the other hand, aloe vera is an example of a softer succulent. In a nutshell, a succulent is a plant whose body is designed to hold and store water. And knowing how to identify succulents is a good thing for foragers, because there are very few toxic succulents. Euphorbias, also known as spurges, are a toxic succulent that has been brought into North America, and they can be poisonous even to handle. And they come in some pretty wild shapes and colors and sizes, but none of them really look like sedums. At least not the Stonecrop variety, though there are many kinds of sedums, and they can also come in a wide variety of shapes, colors, and sizes. In field guides and among internet resources, there are few good and definitive collections of information on the identification of stonecrop, so let's just take a moment to study how to tell stonecrop when you find it. Stonecrop is a plant that is very tolerant of environmental conditions, and it can manage outdoors from gardening zones 3 to 9. Here in Nova Scotia, where I find it commonly out in the woods, the local gardening regions are between zones 5A and 5B. Higher ground and northern exposures lean toward 5A, meaning that the stonecrop does well in this area, and the winters in this area commonly hit between -15 Fahrenheit and -20 Fahrenheit for Celsius users. That's about -26 to -29 degrees Celsius. Hylotelephium spectabile, or sedum, aka stonecrop, grows in distinct rounded clusters, and that's one of the first giveaways that you're looking at it. It also greens up very early. And if growing in more heavily shaded areas of woods, or beneath individual trees, as you can see in this image, it will be one of the first things to turn really green and show nicely before the rest of the landscape has awakened. It also has a somewhat unique green, at least the local variant, being a bit paler than other plants. Its growth pattern can appropriately be thought of as mounds. By the way, if you're interested in growing this plant at home, it transplants easily. I don't personally grow it because it grows wild all throughout my woods and the surrounding landscape. However, I have read that it can be started from picked leaves put in soil, or you can wait till later in its growing season, when the stalks will begin to flop outward, radiating away from their mound. Then dig up those growing mounds, divide them up, and transplant them to whatever soil you want at home. They grow ideally in soil that has moderate to poor nutrient, is gravelly or sandy, and is well drained. The preferences of wild or feral plants also vary considerably. If you find it growing in shaded areas and it appears to be doing well, you should plant it at home in shaded areas. Likewise, if you find it growing in open sun where it appears to be doing well, plant what you bring home in open sun. Feral Hylotelephium spectabile is one of the first things to emerge in spring, and I usually see it come up about the same time as local ostrich ferns, which are the edible ferns people often inappropriately call fiddleheads. Inappropriate because all ferns start as a fiddlehead, so that's confusing. The plant will grow dozens to hundreds of individual stalks within one of the growing mounds, and by mid to late June, these stalks can be 18 to 24 inches high, though usually, among the local variant, in wild conditions, I don't see them get much beyond 18 inches. The plant produces rounded, smooth stems that feel fleshy due to their succulent nature. Like many plants, they are white or blanched where they enter the soil, but just above the soil become a pale green with a bit of red in them. The stem is remarkably rounded and smooth, and if you look at it very close, such as through a 10-power loop, the stem can look like cloth, as if fibers were laid down vertically to make it. For plant identification, I always carry a 10-power loop with me. I find it to be about the perfect magnification for foraging purposes. If the stem is cut crosswise, one will see an outer layer of a reddish-green skin, a green fleshy layer beneath, a fleshy and thick white ring beneath that, and finally a green pith in the middle. And, as this is a succulent plant, if you squeeze it, you'll see juice emerge from that broken stem. Its leaves manage to be flat yet fleshy, having a sort of rubbery, leathery feel, and they have what you might think of as extremely coarse or dull teeth, which are also fleshy and could not possibly cut or scratch you. The leaves grow in whorls of 3 or 4, often taking an opposite position, which is to say they grow roughly on either side or the opposite sides of the stem, with a third just a bit below and offset somewhat from the opposite pair. And there can be some variation in this leaf growth pattern. You could have perfect opposites, where they seem to grow almost directly opposite one another, imperfect opposites where one seems a little bit higher than the leaf on the other side, but usually the whorls are somewhat irregular. I note again that there can be a great deal of variety among sedum or stonecrop. Lower leaves are attached by a very short stem, while upper leaves are sessile, meaning they seem to emerge directly from the stem. The leaf veins are barely visible on the top side, as pale green structures within the leaf body. The leaves themselves are smooth and the veins cannot be felt. The leaves, like well-oiled leather, bend and flex easily, and they have a distinct feel, like the tacky surface of a rubber band, as if it would stretch, though it doesn't. The underside of the leaf is smooth and silvery. and the midrib of the leaf is more visible, though it feels pliant and like elastic, as one would expect with a succulent plant. The local wild version of Stonecrop, at least the one that grows in this area, will flower between late summer and the first frost. The plants produce flowers that are very tiny, star-shaped pink to yellow flowers less than half an inch across, or roughly 1.5 centimeters. However, it produces them in impressive clusters of hundreds. These clusters are called cymes, and they can look almost like pink to yellow clusters of fluff atop the stems. Their great flower clusters are quite impressive, and Stonecrop is valued among gardeners, both for its attractive ornamental pre-blossom plant as well as those interesting blossom clusters. Please bear in mind that Stonecrop should be eaten in moderation. While the plant is considered safe and edible, all parts of the plant can produce an extremely low concentration of an alkaloid called sedumine, which interestingly appears to be in the same family as piperine, an alkaloid that is responsible for the flavor of black pepper. Anyway, don't sweat the presence of this very low amount of toxin. Many of the plants you eat every day have some toxin in them, such as potatoes, which contain solanine and chaconine, and kale, which contains, among other things, dactyl and oxalic acid. Just remember, humans are designed to be browsers, like deer. We should vary our diets, a little of this, a little of that. In such a way, we mitigate the unpleasant effects of many of the foods we both love and need. And we can enjoy things like French fries and sedum smoothies. Thank you for watching. The Naturalist program is committed to the reliable coverage of natural science and environmental issues. If you like our program, please take a moment to subscribe and like.